Welcome to Mormon Land, where we explore news in and about the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I'm senior religion reporter Peggy Fletcher Stack. Joining me today, senior managing editor Dave Noyce, who oversees our faith coverage, coming to us from Chicago. Hi, Dave.
Hi, Peggy.
Before we start, we remind you about another way to support Mormon Land. Just go to patreon.com, where with a donation as small as $3 a month, you can access transcripts to our podcasts, our complete newsletter, and all our religion coverage. Again, that's Patreon, patreon.com/Mormonland. And if you haven't already, follow us on Instagram at mormon.land. Now for today's episode. Stassi D. Cramm did not spend her childhood fantasizing about becoming the first female prophet president in the Community of Christ's 165-year history. Indeed, Cramm did not originally plan for a life of ministry in the church, which, like the much larger Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, traces its origins to Joseph Smith. But sometimes Cramm says God has other plans for you. Earlier this month, Cramm was ordained to the highest office in the Community of Christ Church after nearly a quarter century of full-time ministry in the faith. She is ready to help the faith, formerly known as the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, move forward boldly into an even more inclusive global church. She joins us today via video from her home in Boston. Stacy, hello.
Peggy?
Or I should call you President Cramm.
No, Stacy's great.
Okay, tell our listeners a little bit about your background. Were you born in the faith, and what did you originally plan to do with your life?
Yeah, so I was born into the church. My parents were both members. My mom actually was a convert when she was pregnant with me. So I tease people that I actually been baptized twice, once with my mom and once by myself when I was 8. My dad and his sister and his mom joined Community of Christ, what was then the RLDS church, when he was a teenager, and they moved to this farm town, and that was the church that was at the end of the block where their house was. And so they became avid participants in the church, and then my parents got married, and I grew up in the church and just have had a wonderful life of faith experience through Community of Christ. As far as what did I dream about when I was a kid, I think I dreamed about, everything from being a superhero to being a doctor to everything in between. But as I went through high school, I found that I was really drawn towards math and science. And so I ended up going to the University of Illinois to get an engineering degree and ended up meeting my husband and getting married. And he was in ROTC, so he had a military career in the Air Force and was assigned to Edwards Air Force Base in California. So my first job out of college was at Edwards Air Force Base. And so flight test became the way that my engineering career kind of got launched, I guess, to use a term from the business. But at the same time, we also stayed associated with the church. My husband at the time was not a member, but he attended with me in California. And so my faith journey continued to grow through Community of Christ. And it's while we were in California in 1984, when Section 156 of our Doctrine and Covenants allowed women to be ordained, that my thoughts about church and ministry and what maybe God wanted me to do started to take a brand new, I had a sort of a brand new thought about what all that might be. So,
you mentioned your college experience. What do you think that educational training, how has that helped you in your ministry?
Yeah, so a lot of people have asked, gosh, you've got all these different degrees. How do they all fit together? So engineers are problem solvers. And so we look at situations, and sometimes it's things that are broken and we try to figure out how to fix them. And those things could be processes or the way that people interact with the world, and they're looking for new ways to interact. And so you learn to to imagine the world in a way of what it could be, not just what it is. And, Brueggemann, who's just recently passed, but was a modern day theologian, he talks a lot about prophetic imagination. And in a way, engineers have an essence of that. Of course, we don't feel like it's divinely guided, but it is, what can we imagine? And then is it possible to make that happen? And in some ways, that's the role of our call as followers of Christ. What does God want the world to be? How do we imagine it? And then how do we make it happen? So the way my brain works, I feel like actually helps in both, ministry and engineering. It all fit together, at least for me.
So Stacey, you've mentioned about being ordained, and that change was in like the mid 80s. And so you were among the first, I guess, maybe women to be ordained. How did the church feel different after that change?
Yeah, so I definitely was not in the initial wave, which was totally appropriate because there were a lot of women who had really been pioneers and path makers, but I think my ordination came about 2 years after we were first started ordaining women. I think that women have a different way of seeing the world, and that's not to say that men see the world one way and women see the world another way, because really humanity has this broad spectrum and we all come with different giftedness. But when you leave out one of two genders, if we're measuring genders as male and female only, then you're leaving out a huge element of that spectrum. And so I think the experience of seeing what needs are around the world, what ministry opportunities exist, what people will help them form in their faith more. I just think that there's starting to be a whole new set of insights as to how that might occur. I also think that in general, women historically, statistically, have been more community builders because women have had to survive in often very patriarchal societies, and the way that they made things happen was by grouping together and working together. And so I think that the female perspective on decision making also started to take on new elements as to, well, what does consent making really look like? And does everything have to be a competition of winners and losers? Not again to say that all men see everything as win or lose, but just opening up to the broader perspective of how we make decisions as a community.
Obviously, you've been working in the church now for decades and have had different assignments. What have been your favorite before now you're the top leader? What have been some of your favorite assignments in the church?
Oh, wow. That's a hard one to answer because I've just like thoroughly enjoyed every element of, working for the church, but we're in the relationship business. And so it's assignments that take you closer to the people, where you get to work with groups of people. So I was a regional administrator for a while. We would now call that position a mission center president. And so I thoroughly enjoyed being able to support congregations, live out their mission. But even before I went to work full time for the church, I served as a pastor. And I would say that pastors are our frontline ministers. I mean, that's where everything happens. That's where mission gets lived out. That's where people's problems get dealt with. So I feel like in many ways that was a very rewarding experience. And I wish I knew then what I know now. I think maybe in my retirement, I'll have a chance maybe to be a pastor again. And I think that I, will know a lot more and bring a lot more to that ministry. But ultimately, it's about working with people and seeing people experience each other and experience the world in the way God really intended it to be, and then wanting to share that with others. Wherever that's occurring, I'm all about it. So,
yeah. So for our listeners, some of them, a pastor in the community of Christ would be akin to a bishop in the LDS church, I suppose, right?
Yeah, probably. It would be a congregational group, and they're overseeing that, that group of people who meet on a weekly basis for worship and who do social justice together and engage in the community together. So I think that's similar to an LDS bishop.
Are those paid positions or
They are not. No.
they're like lay clergy?
Yes. Yeah.
Like the
Consider them bivocational. So we try to provide training for them, but almost all of them, they're either retired or they have another career. So I was an engineer when I served as a pastor.
Ah, cool. So you've talked about the past. Let's talk about the present and the future. How would you describe this moment in the community of Christ?
Oh, wow. Well, we just came out of World Conference. You named that in your introduction. And World Conference began the week before what the Christian calendar would mark as Pentecost. So our underlying theme scripture for the week was Acts 2 and the Pentecost experience. And I would say that during the week of conference, Community of Christ had our own modern day Pentecost experience where we just felt an outpouring of God's blessings, where we celebrated the opportunity to be together. And by be together, we weren't all physically in the room, but we had remote sites and people joining us online. We had people present in Independence. And one of our people made the comment, because, some people would say, gosh, Christianity's having a really hard time. Christianity's in decline. Community of Christ is in decline along with the rest of, Christianity. But one person said, and I didn't hear her say it directly, but she said something akin to, this doesn't feel like a church that's dying. This feels like a church that's being reborn. And I would underscore that. I mean, there was so much excitement about the future, about the resolutions that we were working on, about our sense and call to be actively engaged in our communities and cultures, working for social justice in tangible, actionable ways. And there was such a strong sense of belonging and being together. It far exceeded, I think, all of our expectations and just reminded me, and I think hopefully reminded everyone, that with God, anything is impossible and we need to remember to dream big.
So I want to go to a subject that we reported on quite extensively, but I want to get your perspective again. The sale of the Kirtland Temple and some other historic properties and documents to the LDS Church. How has it affected the membership in the Community of Christ?
Yeah, so some of our members, it did not impact at all. They did not necessarily have strong ties to those locations. They understood it as part of our history, part of our story, but the physical locations they've maybe never visited, may never visit, and so it was not critical to them. Others, I think, understood the nature of the decision and why it was a decision that was difficult, and they understood that it was difficult. They celebrated leadership's courage and willingness to look to the future and to basically invest in our future mission. And then there was clearly a group of people who are still struggling with the decision and feel very betrayed by it and, feel like that leaders didn't give enough warning about what was happening, that although we were talking about needing to make difficult decisions and everything being on the table, that the fact that we didn't actually ask our World Conference, do you want us to sell these so we can make these choices about future mission? They felt betrayed by the absence of that opportunity. And so in those areas where those feelings exist, we're trying to be very intentional in listening and in hearing people's perspectives. What we're trying to talk about, what does transparency actually mean? And where are we transparent and where can we be transparent? But where do leaders sometimes have to make the decisions that the conference have sustained us to make? So, so it's like any decision in a family. Not everyone agrees. Not everyone likes it. Some struggle with it. And yet we're still clinging to each other and clinging to our overall call and mission and committed to finding our way into the future together.
Are there any other items that the church might consider selling in the future?
We've been asked that quite a bit, and right now the answer to that question would be no. So I can't, speak to future administrations and what they might choose to do. I mean, we do have some other, properties, investment properties and stuff. So the church is always transacting business, but as far as like newsworthy things, at this point in time, we feel like that we've got a stable financial base. We have a plan, and we're just working that plan. That was one of the topics that came up at World Conference, was the potential sale of Community of Christ 2 buildings in Independence, known as the auditorium and our temple. And there was a resolution that came to conference that effectively said that those could not be sold if the conference had not approved their sale. And we ended up not considering that resolution because the resolution was conflicted with the church's bylaws and with the church's scriptural authority given to our presiding bishop. And so we can't consider resolutions that are in conflict with our bylaws and our scriptures. But we did talk about the temple and auditorium and how they are currently important to mission. And as long as they continue to be important to mission and we are able to use them and be good stewards of them, then, we're certainly committed to their continued use in Community of Christ.
You mentioned transparency, and I want to ask about that. Unlike the much larger and frankly much, much wealthier LDS church, the Community of Christ issues detailed financial reports. I click on a financial report, and there's lots of dollar signs. It's a ledger, like a budget and expenses. Do members appreciate that transparency?
Well, I don't know. I guess you'd have to poll our members. I think some of them do. I mean, those that we interface with, like on the World Church Finance Board that represents the church in the World Conference and approving budgets and reviewing the audit, I think they have been very supportive of the level of transparency. We do get questions about our financial documents when we, for instance, post the annual audit, or when the annual budget gets posted, or when financial updates get posted. It's not a large percentage of our membership that we hear from, but there are some. So I hope that they appreciate it. But I think what's most important is that we want people to know that leaders want to be held accountable for the financial decisions that we're making, and to include how we invest. So we, for instance, publish our ESGs. I cannot remember what that acronym stands for, but basically it's the choices that we make about who we are willing to invest in. And we have filters, and that we don't invest in certain companies because they do not align with our identity and message. And so we want to be very clear about that. We feel like that's part of our stewardship and part of our discipleship and message to the world. So,
well, what's the bottom line on the church's financial standing right now? How's the church sitting right now?
Well, if you'd asked me when I was presiding bishop, I could have,
I could have just rattled it right off, right?
Yeah, no, I could have just, reeled right off, what our current net assets are. But to be honest, it's amazing how quickly those facts leave your mind. I guess what I would say is that the church is in a financially strong position, and we're currently working inside of what we refer to as our 5-year financial plan that takes us from 2025 to 2030. Mm-hmm. And that financial plan allows us to continue to sustain the level of employment that we currently have employed around the world, and allows us to, at a minimum, maintain the level of ministries and services that we're providing. Now, beyond 2030, depending on inflation around the world and all those other factors, we will have to continue to increase our income sources, or we will start to bump into troubles in 2030 and beyond, like anybody would, because expenses are going to continue to increase. And so our associated income is going to need to also increase for us to not face future financial difficulties. But that's true of any organization that's dependent on people and goodwill and the generosity of supporters, just like your not-for-profit Mormon land. So if that's where people need to, just need to participate in keeping alive what's being provided.
Yeah, I saw mission ties were declining through the years, but it's like you expect to increase this year. It looks like on track to increase. Yes.
Yes. So our 2030 plan is based on a slow decline in worldwide mission ties with a plan. So the plan that's being worked is how might we turn that trend from a decline to flat to increasing. But we can get to 2030 even if we continue to experience the projected decline, which is just based on the average of what's happening in Christianity across the board. Now, some of that's changing, but some of it's also changing with a much more, I don't want to use labels, but a much more conservative theological perspective than what Community of Christ professes as part of our messaging. And so it will be interesting to see what our success is as our Council of 12 leads mission in the United States and some of the other areas of the world that are really experiencing a lot of secularization.
So, Stacy, you mentioned World Conference, and you had told me before that there were a few kind of controversial resolutions. What are just give us a glimpse at some of the things that were debated at World Conference, and did they pass?
Yeah,
I mentioned one about not selling the temple and the auditorium, but
yeah, and that one we didn't vote on because of this status, but. Yeah, pretty much everything that made it to the conference floor was debated and was oftentimes there were amendments, but ultimately all the resolutions did in fact pass that made it to the floor. So I don't have them all memorized, but
just give us a couple.
Yeah, so there was one about gun violence and being more actively vocal about providing understanding and increasing awareness of gun violence. There were several about climate change. One had to do with making a commitment that any building that Community of Christ would do, that within the limitations of government restrictions, et cetera, that Community of Christ would commit to sustainable building practices. There was another one that came from our human rights team that was about the impact of climate change on human rights and raising awareness and being stronger advocates for the impact of climate change on human survivability around the world. There was one passed with regards to fossil fuels and the need for the world to move away from the use of fossil fuels. And so that one also passed. There were some internal ones. So there was one with regards to copywriting and creative work licensing and making things available as much as we are able that help promote the church's mission in areas where the artist or original authors are supportive of that. And that one also passed. There was one about establishing a bylaws review committee. I think our current bylaws were approved in like 2000 or 2002, so they're quite old. We have made a few amendments to them, but honestly, it really is time to study them, and the conference supported changing those. So there were several others, but there was...
That gives us a good sense. Yeah. Of priorities. So you have a very diverse presidency. Did you choose your counselors, or how does that work in your church?
Yeah. So in our church, the members of the leading quorum are their priesthood calls, and the calling officer is the current president. So yes, I called my two counselors and, all the members of the Council of 12 and our new presiding evangelist and our new president of the high priest quorum. So all of those calls I processed. Janae and Bunda are the two new counselors, and I'm very excited for our new presidency as it's forming. Bunda is a Zambian resident by origin, but he also has his U.S. citizenship, but he has a home in Zambia and a home in Independence, so he spends time in both places. Janae is American citizen, born and raised in the central part of the United States, but she's traveled for the church and been to many of our churches around the world. They both bring different talents into the presidency. And again, I just think I look forward to the struggles that we will be able to have together as we, work on the church's vision and what it means to lead that.
Does the church have a big presence in Gambia?
Zambia.
Sorry.
Yeah. Yeah, I can't give you numbers, but we do have strong presence in Zambia. Yeah.
Okay. Do you feel the Community of Christ Church has lost anything by distancing itself from the LDS Church?
That's an interesting question. I don't actually think of us as distancing ourselves from the LDS Church. I don't think of ourselves as actually having been associated with the LDS Church. So kind of from our historical perspective, we understand we have common roots that we have these 14 years with Joseph Smith Jr. And then upon his death, there was this pause. There was Brigham Young and others who decided to go west. And so I guess in my mind, I always think of that then as the beginning of the LDS Church that we know today. Whereas, for our church, we bubbled out of those who remained behind and who sort of waited for Joseph Smith III to be, in a position where he could lead this movement that was starting to have enough people to be considered a movement. And so yeah, I guess I don't know exactly how to answer that, since I really don't see it. I think that have this common beginning, and then there was a group that decided to do one thing and a group that remained, and we have responded over the years, over the decades, to our best sense and understanding of what we perceived God wanted us to be about. And I assume that the LDS Church did that also. And that has led to two very different theological groups.
And so do new members learn about the origins of the church, or is that somewhat irrelevant? Like, I don't know if all Methodists know about the Wesley brothers or whatever.
Yeah, it's certainly not where we begin with new seekers, but it's not anything that we hide. And because we still have the Book of Mormon as one of our 3 books of scriptures, you have to talk about it pretty early on as someone's learning about Community of Christ. So it's just, again, we have these common 14 years, and then we took different pathways.
So I have to ask you, what's your opinion of the reported Joseph Smith Dgerite?
So, yeah, Peggy actually mentioned that in an email. So my honest opinion is that I have done no research on it. So personally, I have no opinion, but I have read the papers that Community of Christ historians such as Apostle Locke Mackay have done, and are very much aware that they feel very strongly that it is probably legit.
Okay, so I read in your official bio that you like the word onward. What does it mean to you, that word?
Yeah. So way back when I was switching careers, and so I was leaving my engineering career and going to work for the church, I had kind of a sign off I had always used on my engineering emails. And one day I was, sitting at my desk and I was, typing an email under my seaofchrist.org, and I was like, oh, I need a new sign off. And so the word onward popped into my mind. There's an old hymn that, I used to sing as a kid, Onward to Zion. And so, onward to Zion, faithful and strong. And so, that kind of, came into my mind because for me, our faith has always been about creating this new community that God wants us to be a part of. And not just for those in our faith, but for the whole world, and so our call is just to be salt or yeast, to help make that happen in the broader world. So that was one thing I think that it really came from. But for me also, onward is sort of another word that upholds the idea of grace and, the idea that no matter what we do today, we can repent, we can seek forgiveness, we can choose to do better tomorrow. And so, and that does not mean that we don't have to pay the consequences for whatever choices that we make. But as far as, God is concerned, God is always drawing us into this preferred future. So God is always drawing us beyond our current limitations, beyond our current mistakes, and onward into this new desired future for humanity.
A couple of final questions, Stassi. When we interview members of the Community of Christ in Utah here, a lot of them are former Latter-day Saints. Probably not surprisingly. Are you planning to lean in to try to seek more converts from that group, or is that not something that you really reach out to do and they just come to you?
Well, so, we're not really in the business of sheep stealing. So we want everyone to find a spiritual home and to have a deep, heart transforming experience with the divine. So we feel like that's in everyone's best interest. And so we are certainly open. So we want to be very clear about who we are. I think Peggy, you and I talked about like the banquet table, and so, we want to set a banquet table and we want to say everyone is welcome at that banquet table. And the church's responsibility is to kind of say, well, what's being served at our banquet table? Is it what you are yearning for? Is it what you're seeking? And if so, then we want to make space at the table for you. But if it's not, and you seek something else, then we want to bless you in your journey with whatever faith group you ultimately connect with.
So a final question. What are your hopes, dreams, / plans for the future? You've alluded to a few, but what do you envision? What would you like to accomplish?
Yeah. So one thing, if we're talking just, in the next couple of years, we're going to be giving some pretty serious attention to leadership development. So we've gone through some very difficult budget times. And as a result of that, we've lost focus, if you will, on some of our disciple formation and leadership development. And so we really want to be intentional about, promoting our identity, message, mission, and beliefs. President Veazey, our previous president, he did this fabulous job in providing us this great foundation and really reestablishing who we are. And now we need to put it into action. And so my hope is that we've gotten beyond what we might call our phase of identity crisis. And it's really clear who Community of Christ is in the world today. And now we need to take that message and say, so what do groups of Community of Christ do in the world where they live and serve? So I am really looking forward to some more intentionality in how our faith groups around the world engage in their local communities, their local areas, and putting our faith into action. And we think we can get there through some intentional leadership development, through painting that vision, and through inviting others into imagining, what their faith in action needs to look like on the ground where they live.
President Stassi Cramm, thanks for joining us today.
Thanks, Peggy. Thanks, Dave.
Thanks to Dave Noyes.
Always a pleasure, and go Cubs.
And to our producer, Nicole Weaver, we remind our listeners they can keep up on all the happenings in and about the church by subscribing to the Salt Lake Tribune's free Mormon Land newsletter. Just go to sltrib.com, sign up, and we'll talk again next time on Mormon Land.